Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Steve Goldsmith with Hasselblad, and this is another in our series of artist talks. Today, joining us as our guest artist is Stephen Hamilton. Good afternoon, Stephen. How are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We're glad to have you today. Just to let everyone know, this will be an interactive conversation with Stephen and I, and you can pose questions through the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try and get those answered. We'll try and answer as many as we can during the webinar. Otherwise, we will try and get them answered post-webinar. But right now, let's jump in, and we'll have Stephen tell us a little bit about himself in a second. We're going to show you the agenda here real quick. We'll move on to that. So again, Stephen Hamilton, Artist Talk. Today's agenda is we'll talk a little bit about Stephen, a little bit about what he uses to create his imagery, and then we'll get into the heart of the matter, which is really Stephen's images. And then if there's time, we'll have some question and answer at the end, although we tend to try and do that during the session as well. So without any further ado, let's have Stephen mention a little bit about himself and how he got to be where he's at today.
Thanks again. So I've been shooting food for about 25 years, and I graduated the School Art Institute in 1991, started working as a photo assistant, and pretty much built my business on $1,000 that my grandmother had given me, and built everything I have from that. And it's really, I think, important because a lot of times now the digital equipment is so expensive, the lighting, the cameras, the computers. I bought all my equipment used, and that was when we were shooting 8x10 film, and it was much cheaper to get in. So I feel for photographers trying to get in the business now because it's really expensive. But that said, I think it's really important to save your money and spend money where it's going to go further. So camera equipment is important, whether you're shooting with Hasselblad or shooting with another camera. I think just knowing your equipment is really important. Over the years, I've done so many things. I just did a 0.25 coffee table book, which is basically the 25 years of my business. I've done a magazine called Who's Hungry, which we are just about to relaunch in a digital format.
Cool.
I did a lot of work with Top Chef. I was a quick fire judge on Top Chef Masters. I've done cookbooks over the years for mostly celebrity chefs, and I don't do a lot of cookbooks, but if a friend chef of mine wants to do one, I'm always open to doing it. And then all the awards that I've won over the years. But I think it's for someone starting out in the business or someone who's been in the business, it's always trying to figure out what the next step is. And I've spent my whole career trying to lead the pack and not follow. So you'll see in the work when I talk about specific images, why I do what I do and how I come up with the imagery I do.
Very cool. And obviously, this is a Hasselblad sponsored webinar, so we would make the assumption that you shoot with our gear. I know that you and I have a bit of a history, and we've through the years upgraded your gear from the V series backs to the H platform, and now now your latest gear is our H6D and our X1D2. I know that you and I have had discussions about the amount of gear you have, and the fact that you don't have a bag full of gear per se. You have a very set of tools, and maybe you can expound upon that for a second.
Sure. I think I'm different than most photographers in the way that I shoot. I don't have a ton of different gear. I don't have a lot of different lenses. I've kind of built my look based on basically one lens, which is the zoom and a couple of Proxars. And I think it's important for a photographer to establish a look and build your career on it, as opposed to just shooting with any camera, any lens. So I think In my case, I was started shooting with a Deerdorf camera, which is 810 camera, and liked the lensing on that. And when I went to switch to digital, which was in probably 2000, I was really looking for a camera and a lens to kind of continue the look that I'd been working and crafting for so many years. So that's how I found this one. Doesn't mean it's perfect for everyone, but it's for me, it was a really great way to kind of continue that look of simplicity and just really work on composition and light. The one addition that I added recently was the X1D2. So a lot of times when I'll have my H series on a tripod or a monopod, and I will also go in and do handheld with the other Hasselblad. So it works really well. The Proxstars are really interesting to use just because you're able to really kind of, with a shallow f-stop, really get these beautiful backgrounds that just go into like nothing and just give a sense of place.
Very cool. Well, we've talked a little bit about gear, and that's not why we came. So let's move on and let's look at some of the work of yourself. So we'll start off with this first image here. It's a fish, I think.
Yeah, it's a king salmon. So in about 2011, I had the opportunity to work with a store called Fox and Nobel, and I was shooting all the food, and another great photographer, Jeff Shorentino, was shooting all the people, and we were hired to kind of bring out the whole look of the store. It was right as a like farm to table movement was happening. The closest store that would resemble anything like Fox and Nobel was like a Dean and DeLuca.
Okay.
And we worked directly with the chef, which was the first time I'd never used a food stylist. And it was basically just because they didn't have the money for a food stylist. And I was hesitant to do it. But then once I realized what a chef can bring to the table as opposed to a food stylist, I was really excited about it. So this was a salmon that was brought in. It was going to be filleted and cooked. And when I saw it, I was like, this is such a cool object. Let's just put it on the surface. This was some of the paper that was wrapped in with the twine and everything, and it looks so beautiful the way it's reflecting the light. So this was really the start of when I realized that you don't have to just use a food stylist. You can do things on your own. You can look at food as an object as opposed to something you eat. So I love doing a lot of that, and you'll see that in a lot of my work, because it's really great to just use found objects and work on your own without anyone being part of it. It's just nice to work on lighting and composition. This is another shot that I did for Fox and Nobel, and these first two are some of my most iconic work, and this was when Steve, you can tell me which camera this was, but when the backs were square as opposed to now they're rectangular. So you saw a lot of advertising work in these square formats.
Yeah, that was probably a CF16, so probably a 16 megapixel square sensor on that shot. And I think this next shot was probably taken the same way because it's also square.
Right. So this was a image that I did for this, and the king salmon were images that got the attention of Top Chef. So I had a friend who was an art director on Top Chef, and I think it was season 2 or 3, the one in Miami. And for the chef's quarters, they would always have these beautiful mansions or houses. And in this case, it was at a hotel. And one of the challenges was, how do we fill the walls? Because a lot of the show was not only in the kitchens, but also in their house. So they wanted some different artwork. So they brought in my artwork. We flew it down to Miami. We hung it, and that was a start of, I think, 11 seasons with Top Chef.
Very cool. I would assume that working with the chef as opposed to a stylist, the chef, it's his creation, whereas a stylist is interpreting that. So it's got to be a little different working, as you say, with the chef versus a food stylist.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really understand the team you're working with and understand who's right for the job. Even food stylists, I use food stylists the majority of the time, but I think it's really important to understand when maybe a chef or doing it yourself is appropriate.
Sorry.
That's all right. So this was these are blood oranges, and my accountant sent them to me for the holidays, and it was one of those things. I opened it and saw it. I was like, this is so cool. I got to photograph it. So, inspiration can come in many different ways and forms. And I think that's what's important to be any photographer, is where you find your inspiration, how you see food, in my case. I've always thought it as really natural. And, when I was a photo assistant in the late 80s, it was all film, so everything was very plasticky. Those were the days when you saw, motor oil being used for syrup on pancakes, all kinds of crazy things that were only done just because you had something under the hot lights for
Right.
hours. Digital, it's so much more spontaneous, and you can take little bits and pieces of a moment and capture them.
So for the majority of your work, are you doing work for print ad or for package design or for what is the majority of your work these days?
So a lot of my work is advertising, packaging. We're doing a ton of hybrid work right now, which consists of still in motion and everything in between for social. So like yesterday, we just did a really cool stop motion piece, and most of the stop motion pieces I do are with still as opposed to with the motion camera. And the Hasselblad is great because just in post you have zero color work to do on it, as opposed to when I shoot stuff with a Red or a Canon, there's a lot of post color to be done with it. So this is a series that we started this year during the shutdown. I took advantage of, recreating a whole body of work during the shutdown, since we really couldn't have many people in the studio. I wanted to do a series on culture and different foods from around the world. So this is Sicilian sardines, and we did some Ethiopian food, some Latin American food, and just worked with our prop stylists to really bring these stories to life. And what I loved about doing these is we did these big overhead shots from up above, and then I took the handheld and did these really beautiful details of all these sets. So this is an ongoing project that I want to keep doing. This year, I also invested in new lighting, which, Steve,
Yeah.
I bought used Speedotron equipment. Speedotron is a Chicago company and have loved it, and I have probably 30 lights. And as I was doing all these lighting tests, in March and April, you really had a lot of time to really think about your work and not worry about clients, because the phone wasn't ringing and everyone was freaked out about what the next steps would be. I realized that I needed a different lighting style and a cleaner light. So we invested in some Broncolor equipment, and I was always taught that you use what you have. So if it's daylight, if it's a bulb from a lamp or a strobe, you work with that and make the image work based on what you're what you have in front of you. And I think that's a really important thing for a lot of photographers to understand is, I have been in the business for 25 years. I use a lot of really expensive equipment. I use the Hasselblad systems, Broncolor, airy lights, the red camera for motion. Those are really expensive pieces of equipment, but it doesn't mean if you don't have those pieces that you can't create beautiful work, because I certainly didn't have it from the start. And, I've done shots next to a window with diffusion. I've done iPhone shots that look beautiful. It's how you see the light, and that's what's really important about it. So this
Yeah,
is just,
I know that you've mentioned, we're using the Scoros from Broncolor now, and you're really appreciating the control you have and the consistency there. And I know you mentioned possibly supplementing that with some of the Cirrus mono lights, which would be a great way for someone to get in on the lower end of the spectrum as well, but still maintain the same quality.
yeah. And one of the photographers who works at my studio, who's on my roster, uses those. And that's kind of what got me interested in Broncolor, is I was seeing how clean those lights are. With certain lights like Speedotron, it's a beautiful light, but it's soft, but it has a lot of highlights. So that was the key, is we would have a million flags on a set. So some silver to bring more light into something, some diffusion to take light away. This shot of whiskey is just really a study on light and how it kind of looks on a glass, because I think there's reflection is always in food a huge could be a huge issue. So knowing how to deal with the reflection and how to manage the light, I think, is really important.
I love the textures and the granularity in this next shot.
Yeah, so this one is our squash blossoms, and the beauty of food is there's so many things that I shoot that are only available certain times of the year. And squash blossoms are these beautiful blossoms that you get in the late summer that most of the time they're fried and you eat them. Sometimes in Sicily they put a sardine in them. But I saw this, and this was again when we had the new lighting, and I just wanted to do a study on light and texture and how that light hit those leaves and the texture we saw in the background that kind of mimics the texture. So a lot of the work that I do, anytime I'm not shooting for a client, I'm trying to shoot for myself and really push my composition, push the lighting and the way I see food.
Along those lines, is there a particular type of food you most enjoy shooting? Is it, desserts or entrees, or is there a specific genre of food that you most enjoy shooting?
I think some of my most successful images are of fish and seafood, and that's probably one of my least favorite foods. I eat shellfish, but I don't eat, I don't eat sardines, things like that. But I think there's something really interesting about food that you generally don't like, that I want to photograph it in a way that I would actually like to eat it.
Sure.
I think I always challenge myself to shoot something that I think could look like garbage, and challenge yourself to make it look beautiful. I've been starting to do a whole series of dog food, for no other reason than, like, hey, can I make dog food look delicious? Um, so it
Depends
is.
on who your audience is.
So this is just a simple pasta, but again, it's a study of light and trying to get as much detail of each piece of pasta. And in this, I brought in a great stylist from New York, and I think I work with different people for different reasons, different prop stylists, different food stylists. Sometimes we use chefs, sometimes I build it myself, depends on what the needs are and who's available.
We have a question from Claude that I'll mention here. He says, "Hello, Stephen. I noticed you are working with the 150 millimeter and extension tubes, do you prefer this rather than the 120 macro? Well, actually, I think you're using the 50 to 110. That other lens that we showed was the 120 macro for the X1D, but you do use extension tubes, but you don't use a macro lens very often, do you? With the H camera?
No, so that is the only lens. I have 4 of those cameras and 4 of those lenses. That's the only camera and lens I use. And again, I do it for a specific look. And when you put the Proxars on, it just makes the background go just this beautiful soft. And I'll be shooting at maybe f4.5 at a 30th of a second if I can. I use a little bit of daylight from my studio, but shooting at a really open f-stop and aperture is really gives you, from that lens and a Proxar, gives you this beautiful look, and it gives you a sense of place, but it also, when you look at some of my sets in focus, they look like absolute garbage, and then you look at them through the lens with a really open f-stop, and they just have this magical way that the light bounces off the food.
Very cool.
So this was the pancakes and milk. That was a ad campaign we did for milk. So I didn't put much work in here from clients, but this I thought was interesting, because what I love about my clients now is a lot of them come to me for my specific look and say, hey, we know what you do and we know how you shoot. Make our product look great with your vision. So, and that's a beauty of being in business and kind of building your career for so long. You'll get a lot of people that come to you for a specific look, as opposed to when I first started, I was shooting everything. I was shooting, plastic construction structures to canned chicken, just like anything I could possibly shoot. This is, again, just a study of light and reflection. What I love about this image is that the detail that you get on the sweat. And a lot of times we'll use fake ice. In this case, I love using everything real, from ice cubes to everything. I try not to fake anything anymore, because it just looks so much more natural and authentic if you do it for real and just be patient, wait for the glass to get cold.
I just love the textures in this. I love the subtlety of it. It's such an understated image,
Yeah, so that background is actually the windows from my back studio. So it was a matter of balancing the strobes with the natural light outside, and that's what I do a lot in my studio. I moved to a daylight studio probably 12 years ago, and it just changed my whole vision on food and how I see light. And that all started when I went to Italy on a photo shoot, and we didn't know what we could use and what electricity we would have on the shoot. And I used mostly natural light with maybe one strobe, and it really changed my whole vision of it. So these are roasted lemons, and they're part of the culture series that we talked about. I think this was one from the Middle Eastern shot that I took. And this was a handheld, this is a handheld Hasselblad that we used. And the beauty is when you're doing a one set, you can go in and get all these details. And how I use these is either for storytelling, or I advertise in, I have work on my website, I have work in numerous other publications or workbooks. And it's nice to have a family of work in it, but not the same images across all platforms. So that's why a lot of times we'll do it that way. This again is just this beautiful balance of light and reflection. I wanted this really low light coming from the window. We also used strobe on this, but I love to balance natural light and strobe light. This shot, I was a friend of mine, Elizabeth Carmel, who did Steak and Cake cookbook, approached me and said, "Hey, I want you to shoot it. I've known her forever." And she said, "Oh, we have a big budget." And when she told me the budget, I said, "Well, that's not even gonna pay for our food stylist." But I wanted to do it because I always think of cookbooks as a creative challenge. And whenever I accept a cookbook, the only contingency is that I have full creative freedom to create. And people who come to me for that are fine with it. So I have a friend in Denver, Justin Brunson, who I thought would be perfect because he's like the meat guy. He actually has about 5 restaurants and a meat company. So I asked him if he would be willing to come to Chicago to work on this, and of course he wanted to. And we did this cast iron steak, and what you get from a chef is so much different than what you get from food stylists. And again, there's no right or wrong. It's just finding the right time to use the right people. So he was I think it's like a butter glaze on the steak, and it was like smoking, and it was beautiful. And I love that you really don't even understand what the subject is, but you get this sense of
you can almost smell it.
Yeah, exactly. Again, another study of light. I just love to work on my own when I can. When I have clients and we might be playing with a certain part of the food for hours, making sure it's perfect and for an ad. And it's just nice to be spontaneous and to work a light around. What I've been doing lately also is with an iPhone, I'll turn the flashlight on to the iPhone. If I'm looking for a reflection or looking for a way to light something, if I need a backlight, I'll take my iPhone with the flashlight and find it and then know where to put the light. And it's an interesting way to do it. And it's another tool that you can use in just a vast toolbox that we use. And anyone who knows me understands that, or has worked for me understands that I'm not a technical person. I certainly understand f-stops and shutter speeds and how light works. But in terms of, and Steve, you know this the best, when Steve comes into the studio to show us equipment, he's showing my assistants how to run the equipment. And then I just, step in from there. But it's, I
love a good crew.
Yeah, well, I rely on my crew. I have an amazing crew and couldn't do it without them.
So we've got a comment from Ike here who says, "I am so effing hungry right now." And another question while we have it is, this is from John. John says, "Years ago you mentioned some tricks to enhance the food for photography. Can you talk any more about that? I think you mentioned you try not to do, tricks and things like that, in your work today, correct?"
Yeah, I really try to be as true to the food as possible. But during the times of when I was being interviewed a lot for like Top Chef, the question would always come up, or what tricks do you do with food? And we also had Who's Hungry magazine, which we would always have to try to do some little tricks of what's food stylists or what tools they were using. So we did an interesting one on a potato. It was a video for Who's Hungry, and it was the old way to get steam on like a potato is the stylist would soak a tampon in water, microwave it, and put it behind the potato. So we did this whole video of 3 different ways of creating steam for a potato. One was that. The other one was having our buddy Jeff, who does all our special effects, do his steam rig in this beautiful steam that he can create. And then third was just to do it for real. And when you saw all three, they pretty much looked exactly the same. So it's how you get to a place, but there's obviously we use oils and things to give glisten, but there unfortunately, well, for some people they don't like to hear that there aren't as many tricks as there used to be. But we will, if we're building a sandwich, sometimes we'll build it more forward or use clay or something just to support it if it's like a tall sandwich. But beyond that, it's the actual ingredients.
Tomatoes?
Tomatoes. So this was another study of light with that I did this summer. And there's only a short window that you can get these really beautiful heirloom tomatoes. So I like to take advantage of timing for food. And winter is always a little slow, but summer there's so many beautiful foods that are available that anytime I'm not shooting, I try to just keep working on light and understanding different things, because I've shot tomatoes a million times. How am I going to make it different this time, and how am I going to push the envelope? So I think that's really important in any kind of art form, is pushing and studying something multiple times and understanding how it works at different times of your career.
And I love the subtle colors in this one, from the blue and then the pink. It just, the colors are just so they just look real.
Yeah, this was an interesting image. Again, it was more about, hey, let's do something fun. I just redid my website, and the designer I worked with is her name's Angela George, and she does such an amazing job. And she was a client of mine on Red Lobster years ago, and we kind of reconnected. She has her own design firm now, and did this beautiful website. And she was coming into town to go over some things, and she said, hey, how about we just do some shooting? And again, she's not a food stylist. She knows food and knows composition, and we just played for a day. And I think it's really important to not just set yourself up with a food stylist, because there's a number of different ways to accomplish shoots.
I have a feeling that people are going to like this next shot.
Yeah, so this shot was done for an Arby's campaign, but bacon is one of these foods that just crosses all barriers. Vegetarians are somewhat okay with bacon some of the time, but it's showing that texture. And what I try to do with the food that I shoot is just really show the appetite appeal. And I have a hard time shooting something if I see something on screen that doesn't look appetizing. That's the first question I ask myself is, does this look good, and would I want to eat it? And if the answer is no, then you keep working, and you keep pushing yourself, because there's different ways of shooting food. I've always approached it from a more organic sensibility, but there's now there's a lot of hard light that's being used with food, and it's just personal preference of how you think about and visualize food. But I think the most important part of it is to really make sure that the first question you always ask yourself is, do I want to eat this, or would someone else want to eat it? And if the answer is no, then you've accomplished a great shot.
I love the granularity and the texture in here, and we go to this next image that is such a stark contrast to that.
Yeah, and I just did a hardbound coffee table book, and these two images are together in the book, and there's something so beautiful about those two images together. They don't make sense together that you'd eat them together, but there's something that visually you want to see them together for both, you know, the contrast in color and texture. And I think that's a lot of, I think it's important to do is really push yourself with food and understand what works together, lighting wise, composition wise, and really push and try to come up with different concepts for food and light. This shot was just a looking right into the attachment on a food processor or a KitchenAid, and it just looked so beautiful. I was just under it, whipped the meringue, and then lifted it up and shot it.
We have a question from Walter, and he's asking if you prepare or cook any of the food that you shoot.
Like I said, most of the time I have a food stylist or a chef. I would say 90% of the time I'm using food styling. And then the rest of the time I'm using a chef, or, you know, sometimes I'll do it myself. It's most of the time I do my own food styling. It's for something really simple, like a single object, like a still life or something. But even then, I really like to use prop stylists, food stylists. I always rely on my photo assistants. My producer here at the studio is amazing. So she'll kind of put together the team. We'll talk about, before each shoot, we'll talk about who we want to use, why they're a good choice for the project, and then just bring in all these great minds and collaborate, because I think collaboration is a huge part of what I do. I can take the best picture, but if I don't have a great team collaborating with me, it's not going to look great. So I think it's really important to find people you know and trust and can collaborate with. You know, I think it's also important to get inspiration from everyday life. So, you know, whether you're at a restaurant or at a friend's house or a relative's house and you see something cool, I'll just take a iPhone picture of it and just catalog it and say, all right, this is what I want to shoot next time. Because I think that's where I get most of my inspiration. I also get inspiration from art. I'm a huge collector of art, mostly photographs, and I think it's really important to understand why art is so important. You know, I made a point of always having beautiful art in my house, so I could always see it. My kids could always see it, walk by, you know, photographs that were sitting in museums, because I think you just, when you're surrounded with art, art and culture and travel, it just brings a different level to your work, and you have a better understanding of life and food. And, you know, I think this is also why we're kind of in the situation we're in America right now. It's just there's a lack of understanding of culture and compassion. So I think, you know, I love to surround myself with all those things and really explore every day. When I look around, even walking down the street, just finding little details that bring things to life. So this green bean shot was interesting. I shot this also, I can't remember if it was right before the shutdown or right after the shutdown. This was when I was using a different lighting, and we had a misfire. So this was lit very evenly, and, you know, it was meant to be this down shot of this really light plate of green beans, and we had a misfire, and we all looked at each other and we're like, that's really cool. So
Oh, sorry.
we kind of switched all the lighting to be a single low source that was a little bit harder, and change the whole look of this. So sometimes you have really happy accidents.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I'm always playing, anytime I do samples, which most of these images in this thing are samples. This is a study of color and composition with these acorn squash. And again, just always shooting different things. My wife is a pastry chef and an amazing chef. So she's always, cooking and finding things. If you follow me on Instagram, most of the stories that we're doing are her cooking, and just really cool moments in the kitchen. I also try to do some really beautiful moments in behind the scenes, because I think a lot of people like to see how I light, how the studio looks. This is another series of still lives, and this was, I love art and I love old painterly still lives. So this series was all about that. So we did all these beautiful still lives, using fruits, vegetables, animals, all kinds of different things. And these next slides are a still life series, part of the same series, but from a lot of these pieces were from my wife's garden. And she's an avid gardener, and the beauty of having a garden is you get everything on the leaves. You can pick it and shoot it, this within the same hour. And again, it's just study on light and how light works on certain objects. In the left image, it's how the light hits that glass as opposed to hitting the cauliflower and the melon and the leaves. So I think it's, I spend most of my time just studying light and composition. I think it's really important for any photographer to spend their time with, because every time you put something on set, you see something different. These are these beautiful sugar donuts that Cece made, and I shot them. But what I loved about this is it just reminded me of these donuts that I had as a child. And again, I think just having that connection to food and understanding why you're shooting what you are, I think it's really important to have a connection to what your art is, and mine is food.
We have a question from John. He says, it looks like a big part of your success appears to be the control that you have in your studio environment. Do you ever go on remote shoots or offsite?
That's a great question. I think I've learned the most about lighting when I'm on location, and I probably only do it 5 to 10% of the time. The one shoot that I was talking about in Italy was life-changing, because that was the shoot that I had to work with light. We weren't even sure if the lighting that we had would work with electricity and what electricity would be available. So most of the work out of that whole project was natural light, and then some we just added strobe into. But I've started shooting in New York a lot, pre-COVID, obviously. But I think it's really important when you go to a place that you are not familiar with, and you have a bunch of obstacles to overcome, how you overcome them and how you see the light and how you see the object. I think it's a really good challenge to not only just be in a very controlled environment. Obviously, most of my work is in my studio, which is a controlled environment. I have a plethora of food stylists and photo assistants and equipment at my disposal, which really helps. But I think it is important to challenge yourself to not have everything in front of you and see what kind of images you can create. This is an octopus that I bought at Eataly, and it's one of my favorite images, and it kind of started this whole octopus craze at the studio. We have if anyone has seen a picture of the studio, which I forgot the building, it has a 14-foot octopus on the corner, a mural that we had a mural artist paint, and we have octopus on our coffee mugs. We have it all over, and I'm not sure exactly how it started.
So you're stuck on octopus?
Well, it's just one of those.
I'm kidding with the suckers,
It's one of these subjects that are just so beautiful to photograph because there's so many different textures into it, and I love to. I was going to say I'm a sucker for texture, but I think it's really important to challenge yourself when you're photographing something to understand how the light's going to be hitting it and what you can do to change the whole look of this. Because obviously if we shot this octopus on white, for instance, with a really high key light, it would look totally different.
Totally different image, yeah.
So that's sometimes I will just play with light and shoot it on white, shoot it on darker, and change the lighting. And it's amazing how different you can make the same thing look.
Yeah. Typically on a shot like this, Stephen, how long do you have to work with the food while it stays fresh? Something like this.
This is, for the most part, it'll last a little bit of time, but the way that I shoot very spontaneously. You can't always do that with clients, but when I'm shooting my own work, that king salmon that we saw at the very beginning, that was shot in a matter of 10 minutes. This is another good example of that. This was for my friend Justin's meat company. He does these beautiful sausages and charcuterie pieces, and this tray was just sitting in the kitchen getting ready to be cut up. And I looked at it, I'm like, this is gorgeous. Let me throw it on set. It had no intention of being photographed, but when sometimes you're in the kitchen, you're seeing stuff, you take advantage of it and shoot it. I thought I needed to put ice cream in here. It's probably one of the most challenging things to shoot. There's only a handful of stylists who really do it well.
Now that's ice cream, not mashed potatoes, correct?
That is ice cream, and most of the time I will shoot with real ice cream. The only exceptions are if we're shooting for maybe a ice cream topping company, and you really have to control how that topping looks. But I love the melts. I love the melt sitting under the scoop. It's not perfect. It's not this perfect scoop. I just try to take imagery, food that's been photographed a million times, and make it look different. And I think that's what I find most interesting about food is just making it look different. This is a beautiful chunk of cheddar that my wife's cousin Inga produces in Wisconsin. So she sent this to us, and we did a whole day of these beautiful raw cheese shots, and then we did some recipes. And again, I love taking food that you would never see something like this at a Whole Foods or any other market. You can only get them from artisans, and it actually spurred on a really fun project that we're going to start, which is called Images for Artisans, and we're going to take different food artisans, and and shoot their products free. We'll have them. We haven't quite figured out how they're going to submit their work, but once a month we'll shoot to help small businesses during COVID, and I just think it's cool on a number of levels because we're going to have access to really beautiful different foods, and then we're also going to help small business artisans that could never afford to have a professional photographer shoot their work. So I think it's going to be a win-win, and it should be a fun way to bring new products.
Sounds like an awesome experience for both parties.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really what is important to me is I shoot for some of the biggest brands in America, and giving back is a big part of it. We did Art for Assistance, which was a Tim Tatter brilliant idea during COVID to sell. Every photographer sold 100 prints and then donated that money to their local photo assistants. So at my studio, we raised $12,000 for my photo assistants, and it was able to get them kind of over the hump, maybe pay a month of rent while everything was shut down.
That's awesome.
It's nice to give back.
Yeah, it's rewarding, I believe as well. This is your new book, and I've got a copy here, and I've been perusing, and it's like a hunger magazine. It's like you look through it, and it's like, yeah, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. But it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, it was. This was a labor of love. This was probably maybe 3-4 years in the making, and it's I think 240-page hardbound book. It's a passion project. Anyone who's ever been in publishing or done their own book, it's not about the money. It's usually a losing proposition. But what I wanted to do is connect with my 25 years and connect with the best designer I could, and Bob Faust, who is an amazing designer. He's, if anyone knows the artist Nick Cave, they are partners, and he does all of Nick's books, and they're friends of ours, and just an amazing sensibility to flow of how the images sit on a page and the text, and having an amazing designer accompany your work is really great. And then Alan Cohen, who was my advisor at the School of the Art Institute, I've been in contact with him, and he's been a friend for many, many years. He helped with the forward. He helped with, kind of putting all the key players together. So it was a really fun project. We did a big book launch in early March. Little did we know that it was like the last big hurrah before the shutdown. You were just starting to hear little bits and pieces of this pandemic in other parts of the world, but it really hadn't hit America at the time. And we had, my God, it must have been at least 250 people at this party. And then a week and a half later, it was a full shutdown, and we all looked at each other like, oh my God, I can't, if we would have known what was about to happen. But so we did this launch, and it had all this great hype, and then, the world came crashing down. So we really haven't pushed it that much, but we did for Art for Assistance. I gave a print as well as a book, and for me, it's a passion project, and I'd love to do another one or two at some point in my career. But it's just 25 years of beautiful food imagery. There's very little text. There are some beautiful portraits of a chef that I did of about a dozen chefs, really beautiful celebrity chefs in Chicago and around the world. So
I really enjoyed the book. The chefs at the back, I really do enjoy it. It's a beautiful work of art. Yeah, it's definitely a great a great presentation of the culmination of your 25 years of work.
Thank you. It's we are selling it. There was a new bookstore that just opened up right down the street. I live in the West Loop, and it's called Madison Street Books. And we donated a bunch of books to them, just to, hey, if you can sell them, great. So the books are available there as well as on the website.
Yeah, we've got a link that'll be coming up on that, because we've had a number of questions about where to get the book and what's the name of the book and everything. So for all of you that are asking that, we will have a link later on in the presentation for that.
Yeah.
So
I always like to shop local, so you can order from the website, but I prefer that everyone, if you're in Chicago, stops in the bookstore and takes a look at my book as well as other books, because it's I think small businesses really need our help right now.
Definitely in this time. We've had a bunch of questions, Stephen, about behind the scenes and what you use for this and what you use for that. And I haven't answered them because I know we've got this coming up. So let's go and take a look at Stephen Hamilton Productions behind the scenes, if you don't mind.
So my studio's in the West Loop. I've had 3 studios in my career. This is a building that I own, and I moved in here about 12 years ago, and it was a few years after I did the Italy trip, and I realized how important light was, because my first studio was a dungeon, because when you were shooting film, you would have all the lights off and do multiple exposures, so it had to be a dark space. And then when digital came out, I use all the natural light I can whenever possible. So you can see the banks of windows in the studio, and this is my lead assistant, Ben, and he's amazing. I have a handful of really great assistants that I rely on, and they make these shoots come to life, and they make it work. They make my job so much easier, as well as all my other team members, the producers. Deirdre has been with me for 12 years, and I couldn't do it without the team that I have. So it's really important to do that. Certainly pre-COVID, we had much larger crews. Post-COVID, we are really trying to be as small and nimble as possible. We all have to wear masks in the studio, but it's you still work with it, and we're doing all our shoots via Zoom without clients, and it's pretty cool that something like a global pandemic would change the way we work. And I think we never would have thought about doing a remote shoot without clients pre-pandemic, and clients would have never agreed to not showing up at a shoot. I always joke that a lot of times we need bleachers in the studio because there's so many clients here.
Yeah.
And times when we would have 20 clients between the agency and their client, and it was a lot of people to navigate through, and so
I think we're gonna find a changed standard operating procedure. We're gonna find that this change and shift in dynamics it works.
Yeah.
It works. It's different. It'll be a new normal, but it works.
Right. I mean, we were talking about, now we're a little nervous that we're never going to have clients again, and we have this big studio, and most clients are probably pretty happy for working from home. So this real quick is behind the scenes of a still in motion shoot that we did. The challenge was to make it look like winter in July, and we did a whole set of videos and stills for Starbucks. So you can see a little bit how the windows of this house look. This was shot on location. And again, back to the question, I think from John, was that it's really important to challenge yourself at a location and kind of understand. We had the advantage of having a big crew. This was last summer, I believe, that we shot this. And we had a whole truck full of lights, and and a bunch of bodies to help us. But it's interesting now. Our clients are coming to us saying, "Hey, we have this issue or this challenge. How are you going to solve it?" And that's really what business has become, is problem solving right now, and just understanding how we can do a grill shot in the middle of winter, for instance. So again, like I think I told you, sometimes you look at my sets and they look like garbage, because if you can look at this, it just looks so fake. But then when you put that lens on the Proxar, it just makes it look totally different. It's pretty magical.
That's the difference between, taking a picture and creating a photograph.
Wow, that's a good question. I think I like to say that I create images because it's very passionate to me. Every shot I take there's a backstory and a reason why I took it. There's a lot of times that someone will say, "Hey, why don't you shoot this?" And if I'm not feeling it, I just don't want to. I won't put my effort into it. So I think that's probably, its passion is probably what defines the two. So this is, we have a lot of shoots that we need special effects, and Jeff Benz is, I think his Instagram name is Man Behind the Curtain, and he is a jack of all trades. So we call him MacGyver. He does everything from, we've had him make charcoal for us, to ice, to, if you see my reel on my website, he does a lot of special effects, so things flying through the air, things like that. He's pretty amazing and a lot of fun to work with.
Very cool. We have a question here from where'd it go? Well, we lost it. The question was, for your overhead shots, what do you use to get the camera and everything up there? And I'm assuming it's a camera stand like we see in this next shot. You use a camera stand with a long cross arm, and that puts it above your set.
Right. We use monopods at the studio. We have 4 or 5 of them, and it's a great way to be above. You can cantilever over the set, and it's very steady. It's really hard to do if you're on a tripod, but doing it this way is great. I suppose you could somehow cantilever a tripod, but I certainly would be nervous putting a Hasselblad on.
Yeah, we have a question from Terry, and his question is, do you think with photorealistic CGI becoming a reality that it will put more photographers like you and all of us out of business, or at least cause less of a demand? And that's a serious question.
Yeah, I think when stock started becoming really popular, this probably has been forever, but 15 years ago, a lot of photographers thought they would be put out of business. Now, the lifestyle photographers really had to worry. And then they started being the creators of stock imagery to help supplement their income. When I get hired for a shoot, it's for, maybe it's ConAgra, and we're shooting a certain pie or a certain subject. And I just think, at least right now, the movement in food is real. That's why we don't use a lot of fake things. As long as that is the case, I think we're fairly safe from it, because people can steal your lighting. They can use the exact equipment you do. I personally never have a problem on my stories showing my lights and how I light, because it's really what you have up here. And if no one can take away your creativity in your mind. So I think if you are always pushing the envelope, you have a really good chance of staying relevant. And that's really what it's all about, is just staying relevant and being the leader in an industry. And I've tried to be the leader in the food industry for years. And I understand your concern, but I also don't know that it's going to totally take over the full industry. And if it does, then that's when you pivot and you start learning that as
Yeah.
opposed to a photographer. But I think for food we're fairly safe, at least at this point. Ask me in a couple of years.
I've got a question here from Evelyn from Italy, and it harkens back to some of the technical images we were looking at. It says, I was always greatly impressed by Hasselblad, but I wonder about depth of field. Why wasn't, and again, the translation might be off, why wasn't used a lens that permitted a clearer view of the main parts of the subject in some of the photos? And I don't know exactly which photos she was referencing, but,
I think I understand the question because I've been asked that question a lot. I think the work, especially, right now, shooting down on images is kind of in vogue, and we're doing a lot of overhead shots. But when we're shooting into it and in the background is soft, I've made a creative decision of what I want your eye to focus on. So I think it's important that, whether you're shooting at a very shallow depth of field or you want more depth of field in your image. I just think that when you're shooting food, if it's a sandwich or a donut, for instance, show that detail on the first donut, and then your mind is going to kind of populate what else is happening in the image. For me, I want just that front part, and there's only a very shallow depth of field in what's in focus in an image like that. So it's creative license, and each photographer sees things a little bit differently, but that's kind of how I've always seen, whether I'm shooting food or shooting anything else. I just want to focus on one little detail, because I think my mind works in little details. And I had this great experience. My son is at the New School in New York, and he's a writer. He's a creative writer, and he decided to do these really great creative writing projects. And I read his work, and I was like, man, you write like I see. And I think it's really important that everyone kind of shows a different way of seeing, whether it's writing or with your eyes or with your ears. I think art can just take so many different ways, but I think, to your question, it's just personal preference. But I think, she might photograph things in a totally different way with more, with more depth of field. I think there's no right or wrong answer. It's what feels right to you.
Sure. And then, Stephen, I'm going to make this one our last question because we're running a bit long, but this is from Teresa. She says, you mentioned that you use strobe to work with natural light. Do you use the strobe as a fill light to natural light, or vice versa?
I would say mostly vice versa. So what I'll do is I'll have a main light. I'll have one main light and then maybe use a skim. So with the Broncolor, I'll use like an octabox and have that as my main light to the left or right or upper left. I might use a skim with a little honeycomb diffusion just for detail. And then the background, I'll shoot at maybe a 30th of a second or a 13th of a second to let some light bleed in. And I think the best way to understand how to work with the light is, if I'm having an issue with light and something's not looking right, I'll turn off all the strobes and just shoot it without any strobe and just see what the natural light's doing. And then I'll maybe close down to, 125th of a second or more and use one light at a time, just so you can really study how each light is affecting the food, and then do it in slow steps. Don't try to do it all at one time if it's not working.
And you're just building upon it step by step. Well, yeah. That's really, really a great answer. And we've had a bunch of people ask about the book. So this next slide talks about the book and how you can get the book. The book Is what is it? What is the title book? Is it just 25?
Yeah, 0.25, which I wanted to have a form of measurement. It's obviously a form of time, like 25 years, but I wanted to do a cooking measurement, 0.25 as a title. It's just my name with 0.25. So I don't know if Madison Street Books has it on their site yet, but it's definitely in their store. Or if you order from the website, we also put a promo code in for 20% off. Also, take a look at Instagram. I think our Instagram stories are really amazing now because we spend a lot of time in the kitchen at home, at the studio. You know, you'll learn so much about food and what's happening at the studio just from Instagram.
Very cool. Well, Stephen, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time today, and we've gotten a number of comments about being educational and no problem with running long, and it was a pleasure to do this with you. I know that we've been trying to hammer it out for a little while, so I do thank you so much for the time. I want to mention to those that are watching online is after we finish, there'll be a survey. We'd love to get your feedback on what you thought of the artist talk, so we know what you're looking for in the future. Get Stephen's book. It's a beautiful book. I've got a copy. Thank you for the copy, Stephen. And you know, we look forward to a continued ongoing relationship with you. I know that you have been a great host to some of our events in your studio, and we thank you for that. And we just thank everyone for tuning in today to hear a little bit about Stephen and his passion, and hope that it was educational for everyone. And we certainly enjoyed it from our end, and I hope you did as well. So.
Thanks, Stephen, and thank you, Hasselblad. You guys have been really good to me over my career, so I can't thank you enough. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.